Hi everyone, I'm really excited. I'm going to teach you how to sew a rolled hem or a baby hem or a narrow hem. It has 3 different names. Let's get started. So this is the sample I'm going to be working on today. It's just a piece of it's a really lightweight quilting cotton. It's probably more like a chambray or like a shirting weight, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a solid piece of fabric that I'm going to sew on. I'm going to use white thread, so hopefully it will show up. And so a rolled hem works on most lightweight fabrics, some medium weight fabrics. It's a really tiny hem that makes it's really nice for lightweight hems because it won't flip up as much because it's so tiny, but it doesn't work on really thick fabrics because it's so small. If you try to do it on a thick fabric, I don't think it would like roll in all the way. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do, so I'm going to show you, I'm going to do one side and then I'm going to there's going to be a corner and I'm going to do another side so you can see what happens if they're like going over each other. So I'm going to start with this long side. So the first thing you do is sew a stitch at 1/2 inch. I've also seen it at 5/8 inch and I've seen it at 3/8 inch, but you need it wide enough so that you can iron it where the thread is. So let me quickly sew that right here. Oh, hold on. I'm stuck in the iron cord. So I'm sewing this at 1/2 inch right now. There's no need to backstitch. This stitch is only a marker to show you where to iron. It's not to hold anything. So it doesn't matter if you backstitch or like you could probably even do a basting stitch if you wanted. So I didn't backstitch. So can you see? This is my white thread that shows up really nice so that you can see that's 1/2 inch from the edge. And I didn't backstitch on the edges. So let me put the camera down slightly so you can see what I'm doing right here. I'm going to iron. Here, let's do this. Okay, so here's my thread and I have my iron. It's already warmed up and I'm going to fold this right on so the stitching is my fold. And that you sew that first line to show you where you need to fold and iron. I mean, technically, if you really wanted to, you could just fold it over 1/2 inch and use that. If you just went along and folded it down by 1/2 inch and ironed it, you could always do that. But sometimes I've seen this done on like a circle skirt or like a wedding dress or something that's really fancy, and it would be hard to do that without having a line to mark it for you. It would just be easier to have that line. I forgot to mention, so the rolled hem, it's often used in bridal wear. It's often used on like chiffon, charmeuse. What's another really lightweight fabric? It's not for knits. It's only for wovens. And I decided to share this with you because if you're going to start working on Halloween costumes, you're going to need this for any lightweight fabric you're doing. If you're doing like princess costumes or like under the sea costumes and you have a lot of flowy lightweight fabric, or if you're getting ready for holiday sewing and you make fancy dresses, then this is a great tool to have. So anyway, I ironed it over at the stitching line. Can you see that white right along the edge? So the next thing you do I'm going to use these. I have these little handy scissors around my neck, and this is how I like to use these the best. So what I'm going to do, you can't really see, but what I'm going to do, so you can see, I'm taking my scissors and I'm going to trim right next to that fold, right next to that stitching line, and I'm going to trim it down to 1/8 of an inch. So, or even less, like super tiny. You want this, you want to basically cut off almost all of that allowance that you had. And this is how you get it to roll nicely. If you make this, if it's wider than 1/8 of an inch, then it will be hard to do the next part. It will be a little tricky. So let me know if you have any questions while we go along. So can you see how tiny that seam allowance is? You can see that shadow, that it's just right here. So there's the white stitching, and here's the tiny, tiny seam allowance. So the next thing you do, I'm going to push this down so you can see. The next thing you do is you're going to fold this over again at like a 1/8 seam allowance to get a tiny, tiny, tiny hem. So you have to iron it one more time. And I just have this tiny 1/8 that I'm folding it over and ironing it down. So let me show you. So see that tiny hem? That is like, let me get a ruler so you believe me to see how tiny it is. So this is like a 1/8. Can you see how tiny that is? That's a 1/8 hem. And that's so tiny. You could never just fold that and iron it and sew it without having that extra seam allowance at the beginning, because this is so tiny and it's hard to work with something so small. So next, I'm going to sew right down the middle of this tiny hem to get the tiny rolled hem. So let me sew this really fast. I like to sew it with the inside up, because I want to make sure that my needle is going right between the two folds. So it's much easier to see what you're doing if you sew it with the wrong side up. I did a little bit of back stitching at the front, or at the top and the bottom, but depends on what kind of hem you need. If it's like a circle or a rectangle and it's connected, then you just go over where you started. But here's my tiny narrow baby hem. It goes by multiple names, but this is how you get a rolled hem without a rolled hem foot. So there's a couple extra steps instead of just putting it in your machine and sewing, but this is still a very clean, look at that from the front. It just see, I mean, if I had matching stitching, you probably would even see that I sewed this. It's just I used white thread because I wanted it to be able to show up so you could see. So that's how you sew a rolled hem without a rolled hem foot. So I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do one along the bottom because I want to show you what it looks like when it goes over an edge. Because I find that, like, if you had an overlay and it had a 90-degree corner or something, then I want to show you what it looks like. So I'm going to do, again, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch, a 1/2 inch line, but I'm not folding the fabric. It's just to mark 1/2 inch from the edge. So there's my 1/2 inch line that's marking it. And did you see I got a little bit of, I have a nest right there. That's if you don't hold your thread when you start sewing, then it can get sucked down the top thread and it's kind of annoying. I'm just gonna kind of trim it off. Good thing this isn't like a wedding dress or something important. And now I'm going to iron it over right at that that line, that 1/2 inch stitching line. I'm gonna fold it over. So see, I'm going quicker this time because we've done it before. And then you've got to trim it to a 1/8 or less little hem allowance or seam allowance, whatever you want to call it, whatever makes more sense when you're sewing. But it's just a tiny, tiny thing left. So when I get close to this edge, it's really thick right there. So you have to make sure that you're still getting the right measurement of 1/8 of an inch. So there's that tiny, tiny seam allowance. See how it's a little bit bigger right here? And this is where the thick part is. I'm going to actually retrim that because that will be, the thicker it is, the larger or the wider it needs to roll over. It can't roll over really tight when it's really wide. So now I'm going to iron it over one more time, right at 1/8 of an inch. And when you're folding it over to 1/8 of an inch, it basically, it almost hides that first stitching line, especially if you were using matching thread. So when I ironed this, you can see this was where my nest was and I didn't trim it super well. But the rest of it, you can't even really see that first line we did. So you don't have to worry about, I have to take it out or it's going to ruin. It's not like a gathering stitch you have to take out later, and it's not going to ruin the look of the inside. It will still look really clean and professional. So I'm going to sew through this at one, or just right in between these two folds. And I'm going to look at it, have this facing me so I can see what I'm doing. And I do back stitch, or if you're going around, you would catch it once you sew over it again. So there's the last one. See, and if you were using matching thread, you would hardly even see that. This is what the inside looks like that I sewed between the two folds. There's my little thread nest that I never trimmed. And this is the corner. I'm trying to show it to the camera. This is the corner where the two hems go over each other, but it's really not that thick, or, I mean, it's a very clean corner. I'll show you from the front. If that were matching and I had trimmed those threads better, then you would barely, it's not like you need a mitered corner or something because it's not so thick. So let me know if you have any more questions about rolled hems. This is a great alternative if you don't have a rolled hem foot. And to remind you, this is great for medium to lightweight fabrics like chiffon. Probably rayon is a good one. It works even on angles or on curves. You do have to be a little careful when you're sewing if it's on the bias or something, because since you're handling it so much and sewing it twice, it will stretch out as you work with it. So you have to be a little careful with fabrics that like grow as you touch them. You might have to do some extra stay stitching to protect it from stretching out. But let me know if you have any other questions. I'm happy to help. I love sewing and I love teaching others how to sew, and I'm hoping to share some more sewing basic videos. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.